Hi, I'm Brian with BibleStudying.net. This video series today is going to be about comparative religion study, and in it we're going to look at the various claims of the world religions that we have today, and we're going to analyze them, seeing what they have to say, and looking for what kind of evidence, particularly historical evidence, there might be that either can corroborate or in some ways reject or negate the claims of that religion. And so what we're going to be doing today is sort of taking a very objective approach to religious study and determining what kind of truth there might be available for us. I want to start by saying that we do have a video series on atheism and theism, and so we're not starting off this study by way of presumption when we look at comparative religions. We're not assuming that there's a divine being. We've already arrived at that as a conclusion resulting from analysis. And now this video series we're taking a step further, building on that foundation. Since we've looked at evidences showing that there must be, for the objective person who's willing to consider evidence, there must be a divine being of some sort, we're now in a position where we can ask questions like, since there is a divine being, what kind of information about that divine being can we maybe find, and is that information valid? And so that's the starting point. It's not an assumption, it's something that's itself resulted from a variety of different analytical tools and processes and looking at evidence. And so that's the approach we're going to take actually with this study as well, as I mentioned a moment ago. In fact, we're going to approach this largely as historians. And we're not going to take the approach that I think sometimes modern Christians do, which is to assume the validity of the Bible. We're not going to be approaching this topic as Christians who look at Scripture as inspired and infallible. We believe that that is a conclusion that can be deduced from the evidence, but we don't believe that that's the place that you start. You don't start with an assumption. In fact, in our personal lives, we have been convicted that that is the fact as a result of looking at evidence, but we don't presuppose it to be the case. And so we don't approach anything here by presupposing. We don't have that kind of blind faith. And this issue of blind faith is going to be a large part of the comparisons that we make from one religion to another. For more information about that and how we don't believe Christianity is a religion of blind faith, but a religion that offers evidence and suggests the use of reason, examining that evidence to arrive at the belief of Christianity, I would suggest our study on epistemology, which covers all of that. So again, this is a study that we're doing today that presupposes other studies' conclusions, and we're not starting from scratch here. We're building on existing material. And so with that said, let's move forward and talk about the topic we're actually going to be dealing with today, and that is this issue of comparative religions, particularly a look at them from a historical perspective. And so I want to start by asking the question, when you approach the issue of truth or the issue of religions, what do you expect to be the way to analyze this? When someone suggests that they believe something or that you ought to believe something, which sometimes happens today, do we just expect to receive what they have to say and believe it ourselves just because they have the audacity to say it? Just because they're bold enough or courageous enough to say it, should we then just believe as well? Or do we expect some sort of evidence? And I would argue that, like everything else in our life, that more often than not we're asking for evidence. We don't want to just believe anything, whether it's religious or otherwise, without some sort of evidence and reasonable explanation. And so that's going to be the criteria that we use when we look at various religions. In fact, we can talk about religion and basically find that most of the religions out there in the world today fall into one of two categories. Number one, there's going to be the category that you might call evidentiary religions. And that's religions that offer evidence for those who would believe it. They say, here's our evidence. That evidence can come in various forms. It can come in the form of presenting historical writings from the past, like the New Testament does with the Old Testament, for example, or like Islam does when it points to the scriptures of Christianity and Judaism as its forerunners. There can be natural evidence in terms of pointing to the physical world as evidence of God, but there can also be supernatural evidence that's offered by them, evidence such as miracles or prophecies that are fulfilled. And so they offer evidences for people to consider, and then in considering them, that they would derive belief from that process. On the other hand, there is religious groups, religions out there that should be categorized as mystical, or what we call propositional mysticism, because they really are simply proposing an idea that's derived from mystical processes, and they not only don't offer proof, but they disclaim proof. In other words, they negate the idea of using evidence or reason to arrive at various religious ideas or beliefs. In fact, I want to read some definitions here on that particular point. And it's going to be definitions for the word mysticism. And we've covered this already in our epistemology study, so I won't get into too much depth here, but Encyclopedia Britannica, when defining mysticism, says, mysticism may be defined as belief in a third kind of knowledge, the other two being sense knowledge and knowledge by inference. So sense knowledge would be information you gather by your senses. So whatever is going on in the objective world, you see it, you hear it, you taste it, you touch it, you measure it through experiment and observation, and that's sense data. That's one kind of knowledge. Knowledge by inference, inference is drawing reason onto fact to produce conclusions. So you have two different kinds of knowledge mentioned here. One is sort of an empirical approach through evidence, and the other is through reason. And mysticism is being defined as a third kind of knowledge. Well, what kind is it? They provide a definition here for us from writer Adolf Lawson, who says that the essence of mysticism is the assertion of an intuition which transcends the temporal categories of the understanding. Temporal categories would be a word that would be sort of coined through Platonism, dealing with those things that we see on this level of being in the physical world all around us. So in this sense, intuition that transcends the physical world that we see all around us. And he says rationalism cannot conduct us to the essence of things. So in both cases they talk now about the rejection of rationalism and the rejection of objective evidence from the physical world. In the resulting conclusion here, we therefore need intellectual vision. So the idea, as ultimately defined by Merriam-Webster's, is the belief that direct knowledge of God, spiritual truth, or ultimately reality can be attained through subjective experience such as intuition or insight. So it's not just a supplement for objective analysis or evidence. In the case of mystical religions and mystical worldviews, it's a rejection of both objective evidence and reason applied to it as a means by which we can derive a knowledge of the truth. And in a substitute for those two approaches, it offers instead the idea that we need to look inwardly to a mystical vision, intuition, or mystical insight through direct experience with God. And that is how we will understand the truth of reality all around us. And so religions can be grouped into those two categories, and a large part of our comparison is going to be identifying which religions fall into which categories. And the reason that this is important, of course, is because if you ask the question, how would we determine what religious view is true? I think most of us would want to know, as I said earlier, what kind of evidence is available. And for those religions that don't offer any evidence, and in fact disclaim the idea of evidence and reason, well, most of us, if we approach life through an objective, reasonable point of view and a more empirical, I want to observe this, I want to test this, I want to be skeptical before I dive right in. If that's our point of view, those religions that are mystical are going to be off the table automatically for us. And what we're going to be left with is a group of religions that offer evidence, and those of us who are interested in evidence can then look at that evidence and scrutinize it and see which of those religions may stand the test that we apply to it through our scrutiny, the different questions we might ask. So that's going to be an important question that we ask today concerning evidence. And sort of the second question is going to be this issue of historical data. What kind of historical source material is available to corroborate various religious claims, when they were made, who they were made by? And we'll talk about that in the next video segment here. So I'm going to put it on pause and we'll come back in just a moment.